what is your why, and how do you message that and say that, and what's your story, I think will become even that much more important for brands to figure out as they think about advertising via audio, because they need to figure out how to tell that story creatively in a way that's resonant with the audiences of these communities that are listening on audio.
Hi, I'm Christina Malcom, and welcome to the Roundtables, presented by iProspect. Today, I'm joined by MATTEO CEURVELS from eMARKETER, Erica Anderson from Vox Media, ZIAD AHMED, Generation Z entrepreneur, and Max CUTLER from PARCAST and Spotify. And today, we're here to talk about new sound, new rules. We're talking audio, podcasts, voice, digital assistants. And let's start off with something fairly simple. You know, voice is a very natural way of communicating, and it's really kind of a universal language. Do you guys agree that there's a universality of sound and that we can connect more people and technology together through this medium? Let's start with you, Erica.
Well, thank you for having me. This is an incredible area to be in. And Vox Media Podcast Network, we have dozens, actually I think 150 podcasts. So we obviously believe that it's a way to connect people to interesting information. Also, I just have to say, not everyone can hear. There's a hard of hearing community. So it is something we work hard on with like transcripts and making it accessible, which I just want to add in.
Yeah, that's great. Nice. What about you?
Yeah, I think sound is the way, it's the easiest way for people to communicate since the dawn of time. It's how we've evolved from grunts and sounds to complex wording and poetry and sound, but now we have music, which is the universal language. We have voice, and as we localize voice and make voice technology available in a variety of different technologies, it's the way of the future, and I definitely think it's a great way to bridge both cultural and social barriers with it.
ZIAD?
Yeah, I think that sound is something that's huge right now, right? And lots of young people are listening to podcasts, and sound is really reshaping a lot of how we think about marketing and communication. But I also think that Generation Z and young people are also an audio-visual generation. Like, there is this like intersection, right? Music videos, are the best example of that, right? Where you include the visual with the audio often, and it isn't just one or the other. In a lot of cases, it's a way that we can infuse. But I think that music and talking to one another and having conversation and digital conversation, and the fact that we're living in times where it's so easy to connect with people, through audio is really powerful and completely reshaping how we talk and how we communicate with each other.
And I think that's interesting. So there's this interactive aspect as well, and I wonder, how can we actually? Some people say that this is just radio with fresh packaging, but really with this digital sound wave, I think there's more to it than that, and there's an interactivity that we can now play. Have you seen this already, or are there some big brands already doing this?
I mean, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of examples of Crooked Media, right, and Pod Save, the people in Pod Save America going on tour, right, and meeting the people who are listening, because it's more of a conversation, and people feel really connected to what they're listening to. And I think that radio felt very far away for a lot of people, but podcasting feels much closer, right? And I think that because there's so much choice, right? We're living in times where there's so much opportunity to choose what you want to listen to and to choose what you want to watch and to choose the information that you're reading, that when you make a decision to commit to a podcast, you're a groupie. You're not just passively turning on the radio. You're not tuning in once. You are a part of something, part of a community. And I think that community aspect and building digital community and then building off of that, having those in-person experiences, and then also sometimes building out audio-visual content on top of podcasting and on top of music really allows this ecosystem to exist where people feel really connected, with audio being the lowest barrier to entry. But as you said, even that can be a barrier to entry that we have to think critically about.
So I think what's really interesting right now is, one, it's definitely the golden age of audio, right? There's no, it's the time people are getting connected again. And podcasting specifically, you have to take an action to follow a podcast. You have to subscribe, you have to follow, and that immediately builds trust with your host. So what you're seeing right now is people believe in their host. They become their friends, they engage. It's a very intimate experience on one-on-one. And so what's really exciting for me about the future is technology has the ability to make this more of a interactive experience. So when you think of the technology that Spotify is doing, that PARCAST is doing from both a format standpoint, it's exciting for the future. I mean, we could actually build audio experiences based when somebody's working out, knowing they're going to work out, based if they're reading a book, based on whatever they're kind of doing on a day-to-day basis. And that's really exciting, because right now it's very much a one-way, actually, when you think about it from a communication standpoint, and we have the ability to make it more interactive.
How do you do that?
Well, I think I think that right now, when at Spotify, we know when somebody's like working out, for example. So we can create a podcast that helps them achieve their goal, helps them motivate them while they're working out, for example. Or in PARCAST case, we just launched 12 daily shows for the Horoscope Network. So it's like your daily horoscope, 2 to 3 minutes in content. I think a big issue in the podcast space, not an issue, but a lot of people think that a podcast needs to be 30 minutes in length. Why does it need to be 30 minutes in length? Why can't it be 2 minutes of great audio? Why can't it be 15 minutes? Why can't we release shows at certain times of the day with their habits? You know, Horoscopes is coming out every day at 6 a.m. because we want to get people when they wake up. It's a calm way to kind of start your day, as opposed to, you know, other podcasts we have coming out, they're going to release at certain times of the day and cadences to really connect with them, what they're doing. And what you said is 100% right. I mean, it's amazing what's happening in the live touring business right now. I don't know if you've been to a live tour, but I mean, their listeners are fans, and they think they're their best friend, and it's so cool to see. And it's not only like with the host, but it's with fans with another. You really join a community, and I really think it goes back to the idea of like you're trusting them when you press that first button. It's built on trust.
And Erica, you are pretty big in the podcast world as well. Anything to add?
You know, for a lot of our hosts, they get recognized on the street for their shows, which is kind of incredible because they're not being overheard, they're being recognized, which means people are connecting with them much like the early age of YouTube influencers. They're listening to Pivot with Scott Galloway, one of our hosts, and they feel like they know him, they see him on the street and they say hi. Or Kara Swisher, who I work for. You know, Kara's doing appearances on CNBC and NBC, and nothing wrong with that, but she gets recognized more for her shows than for that. So I totally agree with this community aspect. And it's also just a really fun time creatively, like producing shows, because there is so much opportunity. There's talk shows, which we're all familiar with. There's narrative shows that are coming out. There's, you know, so many genres that are popping up. And so in this era of like media and journalism specifically, which is what I focus on, that it's been a difficult road to say the least. It's such a bright spot to have this new product and format that is really educating and informing people, but is creating great interaction with audiences and for advertisers. So
and that's like the big point that's different from now than like the golden age of radio, is that the format, like radio was very formatted. That's not the case anymore. Like, to my point, to your point, we can come up with an idea and just, is it a 15-second podcast? Is it like, are we going to do a musical podcast? Like, what is that? And I think that's really interesting. And I just love the creativity of what's going on right now. There's 600,000 podcasts. Anybody can do it. Anybody can create, and that's amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's a big point, right? I think that media is an industry where a lot of people have felt like on the outside of it, right? Like, it's hard, it seems, like I said, far away. And you have to be part of the bureaucracy and the machine to be part of media. And the media is sort of this foreign entity. But I think podcasting, like, you can just record through Skype, right? And like so many young people are just like creating their own podcast and just having dope guests and, you know, adding people on social media to be guests on their shows, and it's democratized, right? Like anyone can have a conversation and that can be heard. And I think that subsequently the community aspect is even more enriched because it doesn't feel exclusive, right? It feels like anyone could be a part of it, but I'm actively choosing to be a part of it. Right? It's not just that I only had 3 channels and so I watched it and like we're like implicitly connected. It's like, no, like anyone could make content, but I chose to watch your content. I chose to listen to your content, and like that makes something really special here.
Just to jump in with that, I think that's the beauty of digital in general. It's like we saw with television as well. Traditional TV, you were relegated to just a couple channels. The main stations, but now with digital audio, it's like I don't have to just listen to whatever signal I get in my car or comes up. I can actively choose, I want to listen to this genre, I want to listen to this podcast host. And you know, from research we've seen, people that listen to podcasts really love podcasts. It's like not just one, like they will binge and consume content, and it's like what we were just discussing. It's a community, and then you become part of this on social media, you share it, you interact with the host. So it's definitely a great environment.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, the average person, if you listen to podcasts, you listen to 7 a week. That's at least 7 hours of content. That's really a lot of, like, you become part of them. Like you feel like it's your family, and that's special.
So how can brands really start to leverage that? Yes, podcasts. How can brands start to interact in a way that's real? But also outside of podcasts and kind of other audio formats, are there digital assistants or bots or skills or things like that brands can really start to leverage?
One of the things that we've done, so for both Pivot and Decode, 2 of the shows I work on, we obviously have, you know, lots of brand relationships and ads that are run throughout the show. And sometimes they're host-read ads where, you know, Kara or Scott will actually read the ad if they feel comfortable and excited about the brand. Sometimes they're producer-read ads. But we've also tested out some creative ways where Kara Swisher specifically interacted with an HBO character from Silicon Valley. So she pretended like she was interviewing this character, and it was a branded segment and very transparent with the community about what it was. But it was a nice way to like experiment and, play around with the advertisers to figure out how to not just like run an ad in the podcast, but do something that felt personalized and creative as well. Yeah.
Nice. Any other brands that are really doing this well?
So I think that one brand that comes to mind immediately is Nell Diamond, who is the founder of Hill House Home, and she just created a podcast, that's about the audience that she caters to, which is, millennial women who are aspiring to be entrepreneurs and leaders and et cetera. And so she, as the founder of this company, is doing a branded partnership with another larger company to sponsor this conversation series with women entrepreneurs and et cetera. And I think that's a really good example of an authentic way to tell a story, because brands nowadays, much like we're talking about podcasts, build community, right? And the people who are buying from a certain brand, especially like these more niche brands, feel like they're part of something. And so podcasting is a great opportunity for brands to figure out, okay, let's find a podcasting series or person whose values and story is consistent with ours. And that can be a really authentic way to like partner and sponsor a podcast series that brings traffic to what you're selling and what you're doing, because it's native and authentic to what your story is. But I also think that beyond, podcasting, there's so many ways that like audio is becoming so entrenched into marketing. So we think about like TikTok, right? You can pay TikTokers and influencers to use your audio, right? To have your track be what they're dubbing. And I think that like TikTok, while also incredibly visual, is all about audio, right? And all about, dubbing and using audio creatively and using it's memes, but in audio format. Right? It's the same format and taking spins on them. And I think that's a great example of another space where brands need to be playing more is TikTok, right? Where audio is being used so creatively, and there are interesting things that brands can do to use influencer marketing on TikTok, as well as think about, from a music company's point of view, and music companies, what can they do to get their artists songs being played on TikTok and et cetera. So I think there's lots of new opportunities, especially because what I think is so important about audio is that it allows us to multitask, right? Generation Z spends 9 hours a day online, 4 hours of which digitally multitasking. When you're watching like a TV show, you can multitask, but it's easier when you're just listening, right? You can do homework, you can do so many things, you can walk, it's just a continuous process, and TikTok is just so addicting and so accessible, right? And it's these opportunities to allow you to do so many things at once while consuming content through audio is an amazing opportunity for brands to meet you where you're at, because audio is with us at all parts of the day.
So I think what's really interesting is Gen Z is listening to podcasts. The 56% of them actually on Spotify listen, which is a lot bigger than I think most people would think. I actually don't think branded podcasts are really going to work anymore in the future. It's been done for the last 3 or 4 years. They don't have the audience size. So if you're really a brand and you want to connect with your audience, what's really interesting is we're at this huge shift right now. We went from a download system and we're going to be switching to a streaming system. And that's just not only because I'm at Spotify, that's just going to be the whole entire ecosystem in the future. And what that allows us to do is really be a lot more smart with who you can target if you're a brand. Before, you'd have to buy a show and that maybe the show is 34% female or whatever it is. But if you're a brand now and you want to target 27 to 30-year-olds, women in Boston, you can do that now with streaming and Spotify. That wasn't the case before in audio, and so I'd much rather do that if I was a brand, but I also wouldn't want to focus on one show. I would say to Spotify, let's do 20 shows and buy the whole entire thing. And I think that's a lot more interesting as you go from an ROI standpoint or brand perspective. Branded podcasts work really well to get your message out. It's a different type of a more boutique marketing, because the audience just haven't really been there for those historically.
And you're talking a little bit about targeting here. Is there kind of a different market for different generations, and how did you tap into Generation Z versus perhaps an older market within the audio space?
A different market meaning in terms of how, I'm kind of confused by the question actually.
Generationally.
Generationally, yeah. My actual point is that I don't think it needs to be generationally. I think that if we know that Gen Z is listening to these X, Y, and Z podcasts, we can target them. It doesn't matter the podcast title anymore. Same thing if you're in an older generation. So what's really interesting is before a podcast, if you want to advertise on a podcast, and I've done this for a long time, you'd have to be I want to buy 100,000 downloads on serial killers. Okay, great. We don't know who the serial killer audience is. We don't really know where they're listening to. Now we're seeing a shift in data and analytics and understanding where they're coming from. And so instead of just going to PARCAST, for example, and saying, hey, I want to buy X, Y, and Z show, I can go to PARCAST, I can go to Spotify and say, hey, I want to buy, again, women 27 to 30 years old. I want them that work out, X, Y, and Z, and we can just market across the whole entire catalog of podcasts and get them and serve them on an impression basis. So that's a big shift that's happening in the podcast space right now, or starting to happen in the podcast space. It's just really exciting because and this also is great for content creators because we're actually going to be able to understand our audience better. Right now, when you're creating a show, and I'm sure you can attest to this, it's very much gut instinct of like, I think this is going to work. Now we actually have the data to back it up if it worked or if it didn't work.
And I think that's really important, using data to your advantage. And I think that's always been this like issue plaguing the digital marketers or traditional marketers versus digital marketers, that in order to do really effective marketing, you need to leverage the data that you have. And I think for even a content creator, knowing who's actually listening to your content, you may have an assumption that, oh yeah, my content is appealing to Gen Z, but really it may be like millennials, like 35 in the middle of the country. But using that data as a content creator, you can then work with the brand in partnership and say, hey, my show attracts X audience between these ages that have these interests, and they're listening all the way through. I have a 30-minute show, and they're listening through a full completion rate. And that, I think, is really appealing, that when you build those partnerships, it's good to have that actual tangible data at your disposition.
And that's a huge thing which you just touched on. No one, like a download, no one knows if you actually listened. A lot of things are automatically downloaded, streaming, that you know you're listening to them. And you're able to see, did they stop listening through an ad, which, as a content creator, you never want to see, but it's actually a good learning experience for you. It's like, okay, what went wrong with this messaging? And the content side, same thing. Why did people stop listening at 18 minutes, for example? And so I think that's what's really exciting about kind of the streaming technology we have now at Spotify.
Yeah, but I think when it comes to generational marketing, I think that there are definitely things, and like this is what I spend my days doing, right, with Juve Consulting. We're a Gen Z consulting firm where clients come to us to ask this question, like how do we reach Generation Z and how are we distinct from the generations that came before us? And I think that we're distinct across so many lines, and while data is a great way to, figure out what our trends are, from a brand perspective, you don't understand the why. Why are we doing the things that we're doing, and how are we doing them? Not just that we're doing them, and I think that that's where it comes in to like collaborate with young entrepreneurs and young creators, right? If you're interested in getting the space of Generation Z and understanding it, you should work with Gen Z content creators, right, who have the capacity to have their own podcasts, right, who have the capacity to be your partners in this space. And I think that a lot of times podcasting really is this like millennial space, and Gen Z is listening in a lot of ways, but there aren't as many Gen Z creators of podcasts, and I think that that's going to change as the older generations here is around 23. And so thinking about, as we take the reins more of having our own voice and using it and leveraging that, and how that's going to change the conversation, and how that's shifting social media and streaming and everything, because Gen Z's trends are so distinct and we are so distinct as a generation, it's really important to have young people at the table, right, and to talk to them as partners, as creators, as collaborators, and as voices. And I think that oftentimes Gen Z's perspective and voices are not included in the conversation around Generation Z, and that's true when it comes to sound as well, right? We're controlling so much of the pivot, but we're not included in the conversation about what that pivot means for society and how brands and how we should all respond to it.
You're 100% accurate. I mean, it's amazing to me that, like, looking at the shows that are doing really well on Spotify, Gen Z content right now, there's not many of them, but the ones that are there, they outperform almost any other podcast. It's really interesting.
So I'm intrigued. What is everyone's favorite podcast? Let's start with you.
I like Lore. It's just a great kind of mythical podcast that have always inspired me.
Nice, mythical, okay.
I'd probably say Pod Save the People.
Pod Save the People, yeah, I've listened to that, great. I love The Guilty Feminist, which is hilarious.
I love Pivot. Pivot? With Tara and Scott, yeah.
I'm a big fan of Freakonomics.
Nice. Good spectrum of different podcasts here. All right, so pivoting slightly, I think there's now this option. Audio has become so big that subscription services, you can go, you can pay a fee to go ad-free. And I'm wondering, what do we think the future of this sort of subscription model could look like?
I mean, subscriptions are rising, but even in a lot of the research I've seen, people are still sitting through the ads, and I think it's kind of this unconscious acceptance of the fact that I'm getting really niche content that I love and enjoy for free. So if that means sitting through a 30-second ad, a minute ad, you know what? I'll listen to it and bite the bullet. And if the advertising is really targeted and done well, maybe I'm actually intrigued to then engage with that ad. So, I think one data point I saw too, and I cover Latin America at eMARKETER. So one thing we were looking at is in terms of how many people are listening. Basically, what you're asking: how many people are paying for content or listening to it for free? And in Mexico, 70% of people listen to the ads for free. So although yes, subscriptions are gaining traction, people are still listening to it, and it provides a whole opportunity for people to engage with brands.
And look at Spotify. I mean, 124 million people every month that are not paying to be on there and listening to ads. I mean, that's such a huge amount of people. So I think of it like I'm not worried about it.
I think actually what's so interesting about this question and actually listening to what you're talking about is you have to look at, like, there are networks that are thinking about subscriptions. I mean, currently Vox Media doesn't have a subscription program. A lot of podcasts are actually quite lucrative depending on the CPMs, depending on the category you're in. But if there are massive industry changes, like you're talking about, I mean, with like streaming becoming the new metric, not download, if the platforms begin to have more of the data and control over kind of how things are performing, and instead of coming to, say, a network, they're going directly to Spotify or Google Podcasts, that's gonna change the dynamic for content creators and media networks. So at that point, you can imagine they would want to, I mean, I'm totally I'm considering this. I've certainly not like run this by Jim Bankoff, our CEO, but I just imagine, I would say, like, you have to look at the trends that are going to make it so that creators are incentivized to be in networks that have subscriptions. And that would mean that for some reason, they are not seeing the same CPMs or the same returns on their shows. And just from my experience of like working in media, but also spending 8 years inside of tech and knowing the way that Google and Twitter can change ecosystems with a decision like this, I mean, hearing about what you're working on, it very much says to me that, you know, we have to kind of watch what you're doing to see what the future.
Well, I think that, you know, what Spotify is doing, which is really interesting, is 99% of podcast creators they can't make money right now. We have the ability to actually help them make money. I think that there's going to be I think that if you look at the podcast space, Patreon is a great example of tons of podcasts making money off Patreon and the loyalty there. So I think there's a world where both coexist without question. I think there's a great opportunity down the line where, you know, we're doing things with you guys, with Vox, and we're actually helping you make more money and monetize more effectively. I think what really excites me about Spotify, and the reason why, you know, I'm at Spotify now, is this idea that Daniel has about creators matter, and how do we get creators on the platform, and how do we get their voices heard. And the way to really help doing that is we need to help them monetize them. We need to help figure ways to really incentivize them to be on there, because voices deserve to be heard. If you have an interesting viewpoint, I want to hear it. People want to hear it. I mean, it's been proven. And so I think there's a great opportunity for Spotify to kind of take that and help people.
You should own that. I mean, just the way that YouTube owned creators in the early days, and TikTok is now owning this new generation. I mean, I think it's so right, knowing that, like, we've had so many different people pilot podcasts, you know, at Vox and at other organizations. Not all of them work. And some of them is maybe the format doesn't work, but it really largely comes down to talent. Like, does that talent have that magic to connect with the audience? And when that talent does, it's magic, right? And like, it creates an experience that's unparalleled. So, you know, I mean, I'm all about like making sure that there are feedback loops and revenue for creators, because that's where all this goodness comes from.
Yeah, and I think to build on a point that was made earlier, I think that's 100% right, that we sort of accept that we're gonna be advertised to, right? Like on Instagram, on et cetera, like we're desensitized to advertising in lots of ways, and accept it as a reality that one, companies know our data, and two, that like we're gonna be advertised to. And so what we want is for it to be done well. And so when the advertising is done well and feels like it belongs and it's organic and it's like relevant to my life, I'm not that mad about it, right? I'm like, it helped me find something that I was looking for, right? And it told me a story that was compelling to me. And I think that so much of audio is about storytelling, and I think that brands need to like not sell via, you know, their advertising and podcasting, but tell a story that's relevant to their product or relevant to what they're selling. And when you storytell rather than pander, and rather than just like use it as like a radio ad, and I think that's what's so different from radio, you know, to podcasting, is it's not just like someone talking at you, it's someone talking with you, right? It's not like, oh, like attention. It's like, here, let me tell you a story. Let me take you along this journey. And I think brands need to adapt to that format and say like, let's figure out what stories we want to tell, right? We work with brands all the time, and we say, you know, what's your why? You know, what's your mission? What's your purpose? And how do you message that? And it becomes that much more important in audio to be able to articulate it, because, you know, whatever you put on your packaging, that one sentence probably doesn't sound that good when you say it out loud, right? And so thinking critically about what is your why, and how do you message that and say that, and what's your story, I think will become even that much more important for brands to figure out as they think about advertising via audio, because they need to figure out how to tell that story creatively in a way that's resonant with the audiences of these communities that are listening on audio.
And that's why it's also really important to have those data and those algorithms in place. I mean, let's think for video for a second. I mean, YouTube recommends you videos. You know, I maybe watch one thing, I get recommended something that's relevant. On Spotify, I might be listening to a certain genre of music, and then on my Discover Weekly, I have a whole list of artists that I've never really even heard of, but I'm really engaged by it because the algorithm knows my data and is targeting me with relevant content. So I think that's a great way that we're seeing this evolution now as we're going more and more digital and digital gets more advanced, that we have these targeting capabilities to really bridge that gap between creator and consumer.
The algorithm is everything. Like TikTok is so good because its algorithm is so good. Like the algorithm is so good. Without having an account, within like 10 scrolls, it starts serving up to you like content that was like made for you, right? And like you find so much, young people are finding so much music, right, from TikTok and etc. And like from Discover Weekly, I listen to Discover Weekly and Release Radar like every week, right? I'm 20 years old. Like this is how I'm, you know, like I am a target demo of a lot of these things, and like that's why I consult on it as a target demo with hundreds of young people behind me. And we are finding things through these algorithms, through Instagram Explorer, you know, through TikTok, through Discover Weekly. And I think that algorithmically we need to be optimizing, thinking about how do we know this person and what do they want to hear? And it's not about like, for me, like, oh, you know, like getting to know them to sell. It's like, give the people what they want, right? If the people want, you know, better music, give them better music. If the people want content that's funny for them, give it to them. Like that's why we have these apps. That's why we have these things, is to be entertained and to find things that make us feel something. And so if we have the capacity to help people feel more and feel better and more enjoy their user experience, we should do that.
So we talked a little bit about, you know, finding that resonating message and targeting. At the end of the day, if it's advertising, measurement is going to be key. So where do you guys see measuring audio and sound? How are we actually going to be looking at this a little bit further down the line in terms of what defines success and whether that message is resonating, whether the algorithm is correct or not?
I mean, I think with any ad, you want to see conversion. I mean, I think in the early days, it was, oh, I got this amount of impressions. Well, that, as you know, when you're trying to explain this to, say, a more traditional CEO, that it's like, okay, what does that mean? It reached 1,000 people, but who bought it? What are our revenues? What's the return on this investment? And you have to be able to prove that. So I think we'll see these better capabilities being developed to show actual conversion and attribution, to say that on this customer journey, I mean, usually audio is kind of more like that brand, you know, that branding type, top funnel type of marketing that brands would normally do. But, you know, as we build that capability to show that, hey, we invested this on this platform, on this audio, and this was the return on the investment, and we can start tracking that and say, whether it's maybe like use our influencer code or use a particular coupon code or go to this landing page, it's definitely going to start coming down the line. And then,
well, I think that like historically, if you look at the podcast space, it's all been direct response advertising, 80%. So it is the coupon code, you know, go to caspermattress.com/PARCAST and enter X, Y, and Z, and that's how they performed it. Yeah. In order for ads to scale and brands to really embrace the podcast space, they need more data. We need to be able to actually customize campaigns for them. You kind of talked about this before. It's like we weren't able to do a lot of things, and if we were able to do it, it was not scalable. Now it goes back to kind of what I touched on a little bit earlier, of having kind of that streaming intelligence, if you will, to be able to serve up the type of information that the brands want to see and actually understand the lift that they got from that. And I think that the only way to really, you know, do that is through a streaming technology right now. And we'll see in the future. But
yeah, and I can totally imagine a future where like Spotify integrates a swipe up feature, right? Or where like some feature where like I think so much of Instagram now is figuring out about how can you get people as quickly as possible from platform to purchase. And I think that we'll see more of that as, you know, podcasting and audio gets bigger. And I think TikTok will start seeing this too, with all their new platforms, like making the journey from platform to purchase as easy as possible. I think will continue to be optimized, whether it's swipe up or whether it's, you know, like click on physically what they're wearing on TikTok, or whether it's like pause here, like sort of automatically and open up a tab or whatever it might be. I think that there's lots of ways that we can integrate, you know, purchasing for those who want it, you know, with the audio experience.
All right, guys, we've got time for one more question, and it's a goodie. So as marketers, what's the big idea, possibility, technology, secret hope that you have for the next 10 years and what you can foresee for 2030?
I cover Latin America, which is a very developing market, and in my region of coverage, a lot of people are illiterate. So that presents a whole host of challenges, whether, you know, people who can't necessarily read and write may not be necessarily able to search something on Google, or they may see some text in a picture picture and might not be able to understand what that means. However, voice is very powerful, and especially localized voice, where you can target someone in their language or their regional dialect. It's very powerful, and it's able to transcend all those different social and cultural barriers to really connect with consumers, as we were discussing earlier, on a very universal level. And that's what I'm really excited for, is to see how this technology is going to evolve and change, where one day I can say, hey Alexa, hey Google, what's the best, I don't know, pillow to buy? Oh, well here's this pillow by blah, 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 on sale for $10. Yeah, buy it for me. And then basically that seamless way of curiosity to discovery to path to purchase, I think voice is going to play a very powerful role, and I'm excited to see how the technology is going to develop for us to do that.
I love that. Erica?
Well, it's hard to imagine 2030, but I think we'll all be like hovering around in a totally different experience. Yeah, but I truly hope that podcasting specifically becomes a huge business for media companies, and it's something that really helps them to like lift kind of their own properties. I think I want it to be, I guess I would say in 2030, like I want some of the biggest names in Hollywood and media to have gotten their start on podcasts, to have developed content beyond podcasting medium, you know, in video and others that started in the podcast world. So I'm just excited to see the talent that we find in the podcasting world, and I really hope that it continues to grow and that content creators and advertisers find that it's a really valuable, like lucrative partnership.
Love it. All right, ZIAD.
Yeah, for 2030, it's less about technology for me. I think technology is always changing, and what will exist in 2030, like, I can't even imagine or predict. It might be the same, and it might be so much better, right? And it might be so much better. But I think that what I hope to be true, you know, to build off of that, is the talent that we find to reflect the world that we live in. I think that media has been held in the hands of people who don't look like the world that we live in, you know, and who don't sound like the world that we live in. And the voices that have been the loudest are not the voices that are the truest. And you know, the voices that are the loudest are not the voices that represent the people and the interests that people are experiencing and the realities at play. And what I think is happening in the podcasting space and the age of social media is democratized power, right? And people say, you know, my voice matters right here, right now, and you're gonna listen to me. And I hope that by 2030, the media landscape looks different, not just in front of the camera, but behind the camera, not just in front of, you know, the voice on the podcast, but behind the podcast. You know, the production, everyone in the room and in the creation process and who's making the final green light decisions to look like the world that we live in. You know, and for stories that aren't told right now, right? We are at the 52nd, 51st day of Kashmir not having internet. You know, who's talking about it? Yeah. Right, where is that story? Right now I'm seeing more stories right now about whether mediocre influencers who aren't even that famous are like good people or not, right? Than I am about the fact that the Kashmiri people, we haven't heard from them in 50 days. And so I think that podcasting and audio and what I hope to see in 2030 is that people who have the decision-making power are the people that are around me, who care about these issues, who are tapped into them, who see them, who feel them. And I think that the opportunity is humanity, you know, and to democratize that and to say, you know, more of our voices matter and let more of them be heard. And that's agnostic of technology. I hope the technology evolves around that premise, right? That more voices should be heard and louder and differently and disruptively. And I want technology to adapt to that rather than vice versa.
Yeah, I love that. Diversity, almost politics as well.
Yeah, no, it's a political
humanity.
reality. Like we need to be, my personhood and my political identity are not separable. And when we talk about Generation Z, I talk about that a lot of traditional advertising and marketing has assumed that our politics and our personhood are separable. They're not. I don't get to decide to turn off being American Muslim for a day. Like that is who I am and what I am. Right? I don't get to decide to turn off being who I am in every given point. Like I am this person, and market to me and innovate around me as a full person that I am. And as a Generation Zer who runs a Generation Z consulting firm, I'm pushing my clients and I'm pushing the people around me to say, who are you serving? You know, and who is doing the serving? And is that reflective of the mission that you claim? And that is not just a political truth, that's a personal truth, and they're one and the same. And I think that a lot of the audio space is saying anyone's voice can be heard, so let's hear them and let's listen closely.
Amazing, so much more democratizing of that.
I mean, I hope in 2030 that 15 million creators have a podcast and they don't need to work else. That could be their full-time job. They can do it, and I think that is very doable. And I think it kind of goes to your point that it's, you know, I think that's an awesome goal, and I think we could achieve it. So.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.